For 9 years, the man did not stop repenting. For 9 years, this happened 9 years earlier that Rachel died. Yosef was 8 years old when his mother died. This happens when Yosef is 17. For 9 years, Reuven is fasting. Reuven is wearing sackcloth. He's repenting. He's doing tshuva for interfering into his father's private life. 9 years later, he goes to fast, and therefore he can't join his brothers in the meal after they put Yosef into the well. So I ask you tonight, Reuven did something wrong. Yehuda did something wrong. Yehuda repented. Reuven repented. Yehuda's repentance confers upon him the gift of royalty. Reuven's repentance does not allow him to gain back the gift of royalty. But let us compare the two. What would have happened if Yehuda did not repent? He would have sentenced an innocent woman with her children in the womb to death. Not to say Mimeni would have been barbaric and cruel in the most extreme fashion. Yehuda basically acted as a mensch. He saved an innocent person from death. Does this really represent profound courage, extraordinary quality, the uniqueness of a leader, of a melech? Yehuda acted as a human being. What does it take that you should know that because of you a woman is being burnt at the stake and she's innocent? Not only she's innocent, you're the one who impregnated her. For Reuven not to confess would have been a crime of extraordinary proportions. Reuven's act can't be compared to Yehuda's act. Reuven interfered with the intimacy of his father. He did not sentence a pregnant woman to death. And yet, Reuven acknowledges his sin and repents. But he still forfeits the gift of royalty. And Yehuda gets it. Furthermore, Yehuda acknowledged his wrongdoing at the moment. Vayakir Yehuda vayomer tzotka mimeni. Reuven, 9 years later, he's still doing tshuva. 9 years later, he is still challenging himself, working on himself, examining himself, trying to refine himself for his mistake that he committed after his father's wife's death, after Rachel's passing. So Reuven's nobility, we must conclude and concede, again surpasses radically Yehuda's nobility in this very instance of acknowledging wrongdoing, and yet he forfeits Malchus and he acquires Malchus. What do we make of this? How do we understand this? There's one more moment I want to focus on. Parshas Vayigash. Parshas Miketz, I'm sorry. Yosef tells the brothers, if you want to come back to Egypt to get food, you must bring Binyamin. They present the case to Yaakov. Yaakov refuses to send Binyamin to Egypt. Yaakov lost Yosef, he lost Shimon, he's not going to lose Binyamin. Reuven approaches him. And Reuven is trying to convince Yaakov to send Binyamin. What does Reuven say? Es shnei vonai tomis im lo yavienu elach. Kill both of my sons if I don't bring back Binyamin. Yaakov says no. The grain finishes. There's hunger. They need food. Yaakov tells them, go back to Egypt to get food. Yehuda speaks up and says, the man told us not to come back without our brother. If you send our brother with us, we'll go. If not, not. And when Yaakov asks him, why did you tell him that you have a younger brother? Yehuda tells him the story, and then Yehuda finally turns to his father and he says, send the lad with me, let us go, live and not die. Anoichi ervenu, I will guarantee him, miyadi tevakshenu, from my hand you should seek him. If I don't bring him to you alive, I will sin to you all the days of my life. Yaakov agrees, and he sends Binyamin. You see, Reuven spoke up first. He said something very powerful. Kill both of my sons if I don't bring him to you. Yaakov rejects Reuven's offer. Yehuda says, Anoichi ervenu, I guarantee him. Yaakov listens. Why? Upon deeper reflection, and here we must go a step deeper into all of the episodes. So that we could appreciate the solution to all of the dilemmas above. In the Farbrengen of Shabbos Parshas Vayechi, Tafshin Lamed, that's December 1969, the Rebbe addressed these questions at length. Later published in Likutei Sichos, volume 15, Parshas Vayechi. Here are some of the points the Rebbe makes, albeit in different words. If we examine all of the above-mentioned incidents, we will come across an astonishing conclusion. We will see something very intriguing and very telling, and that is, in all of the cases that we have discussed, in all of the incidents we have dealt with, Reuven's intentions are positive, noble, filled with sensitivity and compassion. And yet, in each one of the instances, his noble intentions, notwithstanding their genuine quality, in each of the instances, the victim who he's trying to help and assist is concretely not helped. His heart is in a good place. But pragmatically, the person he is concerned with, the situation he is trying to help, the human being he's trying to rescue and save, is not helped. On the contrary, the matter is only made worse. Story number one. Yaakov's bed. He cares for Leah. What does he do? He takes matters into his own hands. He takes Yaakov's bed and places it in Leah's tent. He didn't make things better. He made things worse. Yaakov felt violated. Bilhah felt violated. Leah could not gain from that act. Reuven was trying to do the good thing. He acted out of genuine concern, with passion, with idealistic impulsiveness. But the person he was worried about did not benefit. Leah did not benefit. Yaakov did not benefit. On the contrary. The story with the mandrakes. Reuven was thinking about his mother, Leah. He brought home the Dodoyim. But again, he was permeated with his feelings for Leah. He was permeated with his pain for Leah. He felt and he endured her experiences and he wanted to show his affection by giving her these mandrakes. But what was the result? The result was a bitter conflict, a bitter row between the two sisters. What was the result? Rachel ended up with the mandrakes and Yaakov ended up with Leah. Again, a noble heart, a passionate soul, a sensitive young man. But the person he was trying to help was not helped. Story number 3. Yosef. He wanted to save Yosef. He didn't allow his brothers to kill Yosef. He had them throw him into a well because he wanted to go and liberate him from the well. But concretely, Yosef was not saved from Reuven. On the contrary, as we know, the Chazal tell us the pit had serpents, had scorpions. Yosef could have died from starvation. Yosef could have died from noxious fumes. Yosef could have died from snakes or scorpions and so on and so forth. Reuven's intentions were noble. He wanted Yosef to be there, and at a ripe moment he would come and liberate him. But did he liberate Yosef? He did not liberate Yosef. He wanted to liberate Yosef, sure, but concretely Yosef had nothing to gain from that. Yosef was in a well. He could have died. He could have not died. We don't know. You know why we don't know? Because his brothers took him out of the well. One thing we do know, however, that when they took him out of the well and they sold him, Reuven wasn't there. He comes back and he's crying, "Where is the child? I wanted to save this child." Why wasn't he there? He was fasting. Why was he fasting? Because of his sin. Because he could not bear the fact that 9 years ago he acted insensitively to his father. He caused his father pain. He interfered with his father's and his mother's intimate life. He could not bear the fact. And because he could not bear his own wrongdoing, Yosef in the meantime was sold as a slave. If Reuven would have been present, perhaps he could have persuaded his brothers to do something differently, as he persuaded them initially not to kill him but to throw him into a pit. At last, a pattern emerges. Reuven is a dignified soul. Reuven is a sensitive spirit. Reuven is a fine man. Reuven cares deeply. Reuven carries the brunt of the family, as many oldest children do. Reuven is idealistic. Reuven is passionate. Reuven challenges himself deeper and deeper. Reuven challenges his instincts, his motivations. Reuven is a deeply spiritual human being. One thing Reuven is not. Reuven is not a leader. He's not a melech. He's not a king. He's not a rebbe. Reuven lives in his own soul, in his own orbit. Reuven attempts to transcend, to grow. Reuven is selflessly dedicated to spiritual growth, to introspection, to working on himself, to going deeper and deeper into fixing and mending his mistakes, his errors, his transgressions. But Reuven is not so in touch with the reality of the other, with the concrete consequences for the other human being. Reuven lives in his own idealism and in his own nobility. He's often impulsive because of his passion, because of his idealism. But he does not so much take into consideration the reality of the other, the needs of the other, how his actions are going to affect pragmatically and concretely the lives and the future of other people. Whether it is Leah, whether it is Bilhah, whether it is Yaakov, whether it is Yosef. An oldest son he is, with all the spiritual privileges that the oldest son has. A melech, a leader he's not. Contrast this to Yehuda. Yehuda does not possess the spiritual nobility of Reuven in any of these stories. But there's one common feature we see in Yehuda, and that is, in every one of these stories, as a result of his actions, the other person is actually saved concretely. Yehuda's motivations are far not as pure and pristine, as sensitive and as mushy as Reuven's. But in the concrete reality of the other, each decision of Yehuda saves pragmatically the other person's life. In Yosef's case, true, Yehuda speaks of money. Yehuda speaks of profit. Reuven speaks of saving Yosef. Yehuda speaks of money. But as a result of Reuven, Yosef ended up in a well. He was destined to die. As a result of Yehuda, Yosef was alive. He was taken out of the well, and he was alive. He was sold as a slave, true, but he remained alive. In the case of Tamar, Yehuda is not repenting for 9 years. Yehuda is acknowledging a situation which he has to acknowledge. But as a result of his acknowledgement, Tamar is saved. Tamar was supposed to die, and Tamar is saved. Miterev b'ni Elisa, as a result of Yehuda, Yosef is saved concretely, and Tamar is saved concretely. So when Binyamin now has to be taken to Egypt, Reuven speaks again with impulsiveness. I kill both of my children if I don't bring back Binyamin. Yaakov knows that Reuven's intentions are noble, but he will not send Binyamin with Reuven. Yehuda comes to Yaakov and says, Anoichi ervenu, I will guarantee him, miyadi tevakshenu. Indeed, when Binyamin is taken as a slave to Yosef, Yehuda comes to Yosef, Vayigash Elav Yehuda, and he says, I will be the slave and let Binyamin go back to his father. V'nafshei kshura b'nafshei. Now let's make it clear. Before Yehuda can get the gift of royalty, he needs to grow. He needs to grow tremendously. That is indeed what happens in Binyamin's case. 22 years earlier, Yehuda said, what money is there in leaving Yosef in a well? Let us sell him. 22 years later, Yehuda turns to the prime minister of Egypt and he says, Yeshiv no avdecha tachas anar. Not only will he not allow Binyamin to become a slave as he did to Yosef 2 decades earlier, but furthermore, he himself is ready to become a slave. But let Binyamin go back to his father. Ki eich ele lovi vanar einenu iti. How can I go up to my father when the lad is not here? V'nafshoi kshura b'nafshoi. V'lo yochel Yosef li'sapik. When Yosef sees that, when Yosef sees the transformation in Yehuda's life, when Yosef absorbs the metamorphosis of his brother Yehuda, he knows that this is the time for unity, this is the time for reconciliation. Yosef can't contain his emotions, and he says, Ani Yosef, I am Yosef, and the family comes back together. Yehuda must go through a very intense process of growth. Tamar is one stage in his process. Binyamin is a second stage. Then Yehuda can receive the gift of Malchus, of real royalty. But throughout, in the pattern of Yehuda, in the life of Yehuda, we see the quality of leadership. Because this is the difference between spirituality and leadership. In spirituality, you can dedicate your life to scaling high mountains and ascending to great heights and digging deep into your soul and challenging your instincts and mending your ways and being truly sensitive to your soul and to the soul of others. But it's a sensitivity that is experienced within yourself. You can almost become obsessed with your emotions about the others. But it's an obsession with your emotions about the other people you are feeling, you are emoting towards. A leader is something else. A leader is somebody who lives with the consciousness, with the presence of the reality of other people. A leader is the person who lives in the flames of another person. A leader is the human being who is totally in touch and in tuned to the needs and to the consequences of his actions on other human beings, on other people. Reuven was a great man, but Malchus, royalty, was a gift given to Yehuda. In Reuven's life, in the life of the spiritual human being, the self, the spiritual self, is the epicenter of his universe. In the life of the leader, it's the other. It's the nation, it's the people, it's the community, it's the other human beings that is at the epicenter of his universe. These are two realities. Reuven is Reuven, Yehuda is Yehuda. Ki alisa mishkevei avicha, al toisar. Contrast to Yehuda, miterev b'nei alisa, la yasur shevet mi Yehuda. In each of our lives, we have two modes. There is the Reuven in us and there is the Yehuda in us. There is the part of us that craves and yearns to work on ourselves, to challenge ourselves, to grow internally. But then there is our role as Yehuda, as kings, as leaders, affecting the lives of other people. It's really irrelevant. My motivations, my concerns, my instincts, my impulses, my passion, my idealism, my transcendence, my tshuva, my fasting. But what about you? What about the other person? What about your neighbor, your child, your student? What about the person standing near you? That's the question of Yehuda. We often want to be consumed in the life of Reuven. But the Rebbe says, living the life of Reuven is important and noble. And sometimes we ask ourselves, I am so flawed, I'm so incomplete, let me work on myself more and more, and that is something a person must do, we must work on ourselves. But he said then, and listen to these words, Avas Yisrael, the Gemara says in Shabbos, Hillel says, is Kol HaTorah Kula. The whole Torah, on one leg, is the idea of Avas Yisrael, of loving, of being there practically, concretely for another human being. So you may ask yourself, I'm incomplete, I'm flawed, I want to work on myself. True, and if you continue to work only on yourself, you'll refine yourself in that particular quality. But if you go out and you help another human being with their needs, physically or spiritually, psychologically or emotionally, financially or existentially, you are connecting to Kol HaTorah Kula. Because Avos Yisrael is Kol HaTorah Kula. And sometimes it's actually the other way around. What was the genesis of exile? The sale of Yosef to Egypt. What allowed the sale of Yosef to Egypt? Reuven going out to the forest to meditate in sackcloth and fast and be introspective. That allowed Yosef to be sold to the Egyptians. In contrast, who was the grandfather of David HaMelech, the grandfather of Mashiach? Peretz. Peretz was one of the children in Tamar's womb. When Yehuda stood up and said, "Me many, I am the one who impregnated her." That allowed Tamar to be saved. It allowed her to give birth to Peretz. It allowed her to give birth to the great-great-grandfather of Melech HaMashiach. From the profound spirituality, notwithstanding its nobility and greatness, sometimes we can create an exile. When we have the courage to transcend ourselves and allow the other's needs to be at our epicenter. In a healthy way, in a productive way, in a holy way. We plant the seeds for redemption, for Peretz. Today, we need leaders. Good night. We'll take a few questions. What is the explanation for Yehuda's act with Tamar? Although it turns out that there was nothing wrong with what he did, nevertheless, B'shas Maisa, he thought...
One second. First of all, the shiur is over now, and for those that joined us at Shechayach, please join every Wednesday for the class. It's 10 till 10:35, or some weeks it gets a little longer. If everybody could please have in mind those of the Sefer for Shlomo from Mordechai Gershon, Ben Maya Rachel, the Sefer Kapitel Tehillim from Mordechai Gershon, Ben Maya Rachel, again, for Shlomo Kreva. One more thing, now, as you just heard, Rabbi Jacobson will be having a question and answer session for those that submitted questions during the shiur. In addition, you're able to submit the questions now, and then you'll be able to hear the answers Yesher Koyach. A good Nacht. See you next Wednesday.
We'll take a few questions. We'll take 2 or 3 questions that came in. Tomorrow night, Emitz Hashem, at 8 o'clock in the evening, Israel time, there will be a shiur in Hebrew, live, broadcast on COL. That's 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern time here in New York. Tomorrow at 1 o'clock and 8 o'clock in Israel. That's in Hebrew. What is the explanation of Yehuda's act with Tamar? It turns out that there was nothing wrong with what he did. Nevertheless, B'shas Maisi, he thought he was soliciting with a harlot. How is this justified? The Medrash puts it famously that Yehuda was walking and he saw Tamar, and the way the Medrash puts it is that there was an angel that pushed Yehuda to engage in Tamar. In one of the Hasidic works, one of the Hasidic masters explains it thus. He says that, and this is a very sensitive idea and should not be taken out of context. He says this: when somebody knows honestly that he has been cleansed from his Yetzer Hara, when somebody knows that his considerations in life and his motivations in life derive exclusively from the Nefesh Elokis, from the divine soul. But you have to know that. That means you can't be a Beinani in the terminology of the Tanya, because the Beinani experiences cravings from the animal soul. When somebody is on the level of a Tzaddik Gomor, who experiences no cravings from the animal soul, because the animal soul has been transformed. The animal soul is now seamless with the divine soul. And somebody experiences then a craving, they can attest to the fact that it is a divine craving. And that was the state of Yehuda. So when he experienced that craving, somebody else who experienced that craving should have said, this is not good. As Yosef would say, Vayima'in, Yosef refuses. Yehuda at that moment knew himself that when he's experiencing that craving, it was not coming from his instinct, his beastly instinct, from just a superficial or animalistic impulse, because he knew in which madrega he was, and thus he followed it. And it turned out that it was a divine relationship, because they were destined to be with each other. And this is how this Hasidic master explains what the Medrash means when it says a malach pushed him. Because the Gemara says in Brachas that the Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara are like 2 malachim, 2 angels. So essentially, when somebody transforms his Yetzer Hara, when he experiences a craving, it's from an angel, it's from the Yetzer Tov. And thus Yehuda can follow it. Nothing is written regarding Yaakov's reaction to Yehuda and all the brothers after he knew they deceived him regarding Yosef's death and told him that Yosef was devoured by an animal. Nothing is written, right? And there is a big argument among the commentators of Chumash whether Yaakov ever found out. Did he ever discover the truth about what happened to Yosef? Some Mefarshim, some commentators say no. Yaakov never discovered the truth. Yosef did not tell him the story, and the brothers did not tell him the story. However, if you look in Rashi and Parshas Vayechi, which I quoted, Miterev B'ni Alisa, it seems that Yaakov didn't know what happened, because again, what does Rashi say? Rashi says that Yaakov told him, I accused you in devouring Yosef, but now I know that you actually liberated Yosef, because you were the one who suggested that we sell him into slavery rather than let him wither away in the well. From Rashi it seems that Yaakov was aware of the situation. Yet we have to understand that once they were in Egypt, I think everybody, Yaakov, Yosef, and the brothers, saw how directly the hand of providence was guiding this entire process. The last question that was asked is, according to Chassidus, what is the difference between Reuven and Yehuda? Well, it's a lovely question, and the answer is very clear. In Hasidic terminology, Yehuda represents the quality of Malchus, the sphera of Malchus. Reuven represents Chachma or other Kav HaYemin, the right column. But in any case, sometimes Kav HaYemin, in other places he represents Re'iyah. The point is this, that briefly, Malchus as Chassidus explains, there's a difference between all the qualities in the human being and in the divine reality above Malchus and Malchus. All other qualities in a person, Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chayd, Yisoid, represent our emotions and experiences towards other people, but within ourselves. It's how we experience the other person, but vis-a-vis ourselves. Malchus actually represents what happens to us as a result of the real relationship with the other. When we actually step out of ourselves and touch the other, live with the other, feel the texture of the other, what does that do to us? What does that do for us? That could not be anticipated until we actually left our own space and went into the space of the other and allowed ourselves to be touched and to touch the space of the other. That is why Malchus is sometimes associated with the mouth, with speech, because speech is the first quality which allows us to share our lives with others. Malchus is often described as femininity. Everything till Malchus the man can have within himself. But there is what happens to him as a result of a relationship with his spouse who is outside of himself, who is not him. So you can love within yourself, and you can feel empathy, and feel compassion, and feel ambitious, and feel submission, and feel the need to bond, and so on and so forth. And these are all very powerful emotions, but they are all within yourself. And Malchus is that quality which you can discover within yourself only when you leave yourself. It is what happens to you as a result of touching the other. And thus Yehuda represents Malchus. And if I can add, it is not a coincidence. The Rebbe once said at a Farbrengen Chav Chesiv in Tavshin Aleph 91 that our generation, the seventh generation since the Alter Rebbe, represents Malchus. And that's why I concluded this discussion today, that today we need leaders. Because one of the great features of this generation, if you want to access the godliness of this generation, if you want to access the energy of this generation, you must employ the model of Yehuda. And the model of Yehuda is not only to work on your self-growth, but to actually truly focus on how what you're doing or what you're not doing is affecting the other person in their life. Have a wonderful evening.